When I say this is a fantastic episode, maybe you should trust me.
How you get so big that you food of this kind?
Hello and welcome to this week's spoiler review for Star Wars The Clone Wars. This is the 8th episode of the 12 episodes this season, and we're going to be talking about the last episode of the Ahsoka arc, which also kind of feels like the first episode of the next arc in a way. But I am excited to kind of dive in now that we know where this arc ended up and how everything went along. As I said, there will be massive spoilers for some of the stuff that happened. If you don't want to know before you watch the episode, this is your chance to get out. This episode is called Together Again, and we end the episode with a lot of people being together again. I think there's a couple different meanings there. It could be the Martez sisters kind of coming back together and feeling like sisters again, but then of course there's also Ahsoka meeting up with some old friends, which is probably not where the title actually comes from, but I appreciate things that can have a couple of different meanings. I was really happy to see how this episode ended. It paid off a couple of things I really wanted, which was for the Martez sisters to know that Ahsoka was a Jedi, but to not have that really wreck everything that had happened for 4 episodes. I wanted drama, and I wanted them to not just be totally fine with it, but I didn't necessarily want them to, hate her forever. There would be a lot of tragedy for Ahsoka going into what's going to be a lot of tragedy, though it did seem like that's something they could do. But ultimately, at the end, everybody kind of comes to see eye to eye, but we'll get to that as we discuss the ending towards the end of the review. But right now, just kind of looking back on the arc before I break down the episode specifically, I said this, I think, all the way along in my reviews, that this arc felt like Clone Wars evolved. Now, what I mean by that is not necessarily that it's enhanced or superior to what Clone Wars was, in the event that you're one of the people who weren't super big on this arc, because I know it was kind of getting some mixed reception. Basically, people who were really excited about the first arc seem to not be as into this one, and the people who are super into this arc weren't as into Bad Batch. You will, of course, have the people who have been entirely unhappy all the way along, or the people who have been entirely happy all the way along, and that's fine. But they're definitely two very different things, and I've been saying, that's a big part of Clone Wars. It's an anthology show. Every arc feels different, and I don't need to retread that ground. But what I mean by Clone Wars evolved is the first arc, Bad Batch, felt very much like Clone Wars had never left us. Like, if Clone Wars hadn't have ended all those years ago in the Disney buyout, and we were going to get a true next season, launching into Bad Batch, I feel like we would have gotten these episodes. Ultimately, they are different from the story reels that existed, but largely what happened was the taking out of things that were in the story reel, with only 1 or 2 really majorly notable additions to what happened, and I really liked that. I appreciated that it didn't take any time to get back to feeling Clone Wars, like feeling like what that this Clone Wars is the Clone Wars we knew and loved, that there wasn't any kind of build-up. But these episodes felt very much like they had years off to kind of think and mull over what we were going to get, and then these are the episodes we got. I understand if these weren't really your thing. I disagree. Well, I can't disagree that they're your thing, but I enjoyed them quite a bit. I can see why they might not work for everybody if you aren't into the kind of slower, more character-driven arcs. Not that it's super slow, because there was a fair amount of action, but it didn't seem to connect to anything larger until the end. At least with clone-centric arcs, you feel like it's a part of the war. This didn't really feel like a part of the war or any of the big galactic stories until we got to this episode. If that's not your jam, I get it. But I feel like this is the arc where so much of what was going on was able to adapt to the things that had happened in the Star Wars universe since we had gotten the Clone Wars. Part of that is they overhauled these episodes from what they were originally going to be. Originally, we did not have the Martez sisters. We had 1 character instead of 2. It was a male character, and it was supposed to be a love interest for Ahsoka. And so this is very different. This is 2 characters, sisters. Depending on how you read it, it could not, at least it wasn't a purely romantic kind of storyline. A couple of people might read into Ahsoka and Trace one way, and that's valid to read it that way. But it wasn't really specifically designed to be that in the way that it probably would have been had the arc kind of taken its original path. And because of that, because they reworked so much of it, they had the ability to change it, where Bad Batch didn't really feel changed or adapted to in any way based off of what we had already gotten. It just felt like they kind of updated it for today, where here throughout this arc, we have references to Solo, we see Kessel, we have references to Rebels because it has Ursa Wren in it, just all sorts of things where it feels like stuff that had happened in the Star Wars universe since Clone Wars went away got to come into this arc, and it kind of fits more like what Star Wars storytelling is now. This kind of what we've seen in some of the themes in the novels, and kind of adapted for this new EU of more of a character-centric story. I don't know, I liked that. It felt like, yeah, that's how I would say it, where Bad Batch felt like this is the Clone Wars, this feels like what you're used to, this feels like what you might remember, this is, what you might have been expecting. This Ahsoka arc is what Clone Wars would have been if it was always a part of the Disney canon. I guess that's kind of how I would explain the difference. I don't think one's necessarily better than the other. I think overall, I liked the Ahsoka arc more, and I'm more inclined to watch that one, but I wouldn't say that's because I hated the Bad Batch arc, because I absolutely didn't, and I was so happy to get Echo back and have that storyline. I just feel like, oddly enough, I personally feel like the Ahsoka arc is more relevant than the Bad Batch one. But I just because I'm ranking things doesn't mean number 2 on the list of 2 is terrible. It's just I'm probably more inclined to rewatch this arc. But I don't know. I feel like this was a really good upgrade. I'm really curious what Siege of Mandalore is going to feel like, because as far as I know, Siege of Mandalore is going to run pretty closely to what our understanding of Siege of Mandalore always was. And I mean, we have an understanding of that if you've read the Ahsoka novel. Not in enough detail to spoil 4 episodes, but enough to kind of know what we're getting into. And so I'm curious if Siege of Mandalore is going to feel more like Bad Batch, because it's going to be these episodes that are probably not changing too much, and I'm not basing that on anything other than gut instinct. Or is it going to feel more like this, brought into this new universe, considering that they're already adding Ursa Wren to some degree into the show. We haven't seen young Caleb Doom yet that we saw in the trailer, so, he's going to be, even as a background character there. So I don't know, I think maybe it's going to feel tonally similar between the two. Maybe it'll feel like something completely different. I know it's going to be a lot of, sadness and feelings, so I'm excited to find that out. But that's kind of how I would describe reflecting back on this arc as a whole. Now, with that, I do want to talk about the episode a little bit specifically, even though I've already kept you guys here a little bit longer than I intended that spiel to go on for. The arc opens up where the last episode started and ended, with our 3 heroes in prison, and they're discussing things, they're trying to come up with another plan. Rafa's doing the thing she's been doing for a while, which is to kind of blame and figure out how they got in this situation, and she's moved from blaming just Trace to blaming Ahsoka for convincing Trace to do something. And, Trace is dealing with the fact that neither Rafa nor Ahsoka are happy with what she did. But here we really get to what Rafa is feeling, and this is certainly something we can extrapolate from other episodes. But Rafa basically has this tight bond with her sister. We know now that they're all they have. And now this character of Ahsoka comes in. It's probably the first time there's been a wedge between Trace and Rafa. Now that wedge has really been there for a while, because Rafa's been doing these plans and schemes that have been putting Trace into trouble, or getting her into trouble. And that's something that Trace probably hasn't had the opportunity to speak out about. Ahsoka being there gives Trace that confidence. But it does start, Ahsoka's presence does start to put a wedge between them. And I don't think Trace really understands that. She's a little bit too young and hasn't really had to get through those type of things yet. And it's also something that Rafa is not explaining well, that she's just blaming it on Ahsoka, and Ahsoka's the problem, when what she's really trying to say is, I'm afraid of losing you and my tight bond with my sister, even though I'm the one that's doing all the things that could cause that to happen. So I thought there were some good emotional layers going on in that first bit of the episode. And then Ahsoka is like, okay, we just need to trust each other. I know we might not all get along, but, I kind of have an idea. They go speak to the Pikes, And Ahsoka does that, like, trust me thing and makes it seem like she's talking to the Pikes, but she's really talking to her friends, and comes up with this scheme. And I really appreciated Ashley's voice acting in this scene, because it's really Ahsoka acting. So that's Ashley acting as Ahsoka, who's acting as this other person. And I thought the voice work there was exceptionally well done. It was kind of eerie just to hear Ahsoka talk about these things, but it was also amusing because Rafa's picking up on the trust me line. She's picking up on Ahsoka threatening the Martez's family when they don't have anyone besides each other, and they get to run off, and the Pikes are threatening Ahsoka. To skip ahead a little bit, when the Martezes are hanging out around their ship, I appreciate that Trace, just like all of that went over Trace's head. Trace did not figure out what was going on. She thought Ahsoka might be turning on them. She's confused why she was talking about their family, and Rafa's like, how are you not getting this? How are you not understanding what's going on? And it's showing, that difference of Trace is so street smart and, like, independent and can take care of herself, but also is just innocent and doesn't get these things, and she takes things so at face value, and I think that's kind of an intriguing part to her character, especially when you have the more cynical and savvy type of character in Rafa, and they balance each other out really well. And it's in that scene, too, where Rafa finally comes around on Ahsoka, saying the kind of person that would give themselves up so two people can get away and have absolutely nothing hanging over the Martez sisters. There's no reason why they would need to go back for her. She has no leverage. Rafa is really impressed by that. And then ultimately says that we have to go back and get her because I won't let her hold this over my head for the rest of my life, and I have to one-up her. And I thought that was a really good motivation change. Like, it finally proved to Rafa that Ahsoka had good intentions, even if she was being kind of self-righteous about how she had talked to the family up until that point. It showed that she really is a good egg. Meanwhile, as all this is going on, to go back to where we were, when the Martezes flew away from the Pikes, we see that the Mandalorians are watching, and that they know Ahsoka didn't go with them, and so they're still kind of keeping watch, because they want to know what a Jedi is doing here with the Pike Syndicate, and they're interested because, of course, they're there, as we come to find out, because Maul's there. The Pike leader says, we have to answer to him, and then later we see him in the spice factory talking to Maul, and of course that would explain what the Mandalorians are doing there with the Pikes to try to get a lead on what Maul's doing, and everything kind of starts to connect. And so they're hoping to get a chance to either talk to Ahsoka or see what's going on to see if they can join forces. Now, Ahsoka does go through this factory. She finds some, they looked like droid poppers, but they're just basically mines. She finds some mines, lays them all over the place, and she ends up overhearing a call between the Pike leader and Maul. Now, this had some really cool shout-outs. He mentions Crimson Dawn, which is something we really started to hear about in Solo: A Star Wars Story, and it's finally kind of connecting the dots, because effectively what we have is the Shadow Collective, which came from Season 5 of the Clone Wars, to Rebels, where we saw Maul is a fallen person stuck on Malachor, and then we have Solo, where he's at the height of Crimson Dawn, and we don't really know how all of those pieces connect. We have inklings, we have some stuff spelled out, there's the Son of Dathomir comic that talks about some stuff that's based on unreleased Clone Wars scripts. Ultimately, we're kind of starting to just now get these pieces filled in on what Maul has been up to. Now, the eeriest part of this conversation is Maul almost senses Ahsoka through the Force as a hologram. Like, that's how powerful Maul is he's floating there as this hologram, and he's looking around for Lady Tano, as we know he's going to call her. I really liked that moment, and it's intriguing to see Maul and Ahsoka square off, because Ahsoka knows who Maul is, but hasn't really been a part of many of the conflicts with him. If anything, it's been Obi-Wan, and if Obi-Wan has had backup, it's been Anakin and not Ahsoka. And so to see Ahsoka kind of get brought into this world was really cool. As all of this is going on, Trace and Rafa are talking to some dock workers. They're basically trying to steal spice from the Pikes so that they can use that spice to get Ahsoka back. And the idea, obviously, is to steal said spice without them knowing that she's the one who stole it. Here we get to see the Martez sisters really be on their own and not have Ahsoka and get themselves in and out of a situation, Rafa talks her way into the situation and does almost a perfect job of actually getting spice. I mean, they're loading spice onto her ship. and then it doesn't really work out when the manager shows up, and then they get into a fight, but then they hold their own in a fight, and Rafa ends up defeating the Trandoshan manager by outsmarting him and dropping him down a giant chasm, and Trace is holding her own against all of these little dock worker guys. I thought it was really good to see them stand on their own 2 feet, see how they can be this really powerful duo. They might be outmatched by the Pikes, but who isn't outmatched by the Pikes, you know? Also, during the fight between Rafa and the Trandoshan, there's one point where she, like, kicks him or something, and he makes a raptor noise, and it's just like that, kind of thing. I thought that was funny. I could see that maybe bugging some people. I thought that was funny, that he's just a big dinosaur, and we heard that distinctive dinosaur sound. Fun fact, I noticed in the credits, after the fact, I didn't pick up this, even after 2 viewings until I saw the credits, the voice of the main dock worker guy that they talk to is Josh Brenner, who you might also know as Niku from Resistance. So that was really fun. When I went back and watched that scene again after I saw that, and I could totally hear it. I just didn't pick up on it watching it on my own. So that was a cool connection. And again, even though that's not an in-universe thing, it's fun to think about how they were probably voicing Resistance at the same time they were voicing Clone Wars, and they probably just had Brenner pop in and do a role or something. I don't know how these things would work. Meanwhile, Ahsoka has been laying those mines. She gets into a comms tower, figures out that, you know, it is Maul that they were talking to, and looks up where he's from and sees the signals coming from Mandalore, and she thinks that's weird. Of course, she wasn't really involved with Obi-Wan's journey to Mandalore, and much of what was going on there was under the table, you know, Obi-Wan kind of going rogue and doing that mission. So it's not something that Ahsoka would necessarily know a whole lot about. At this point, she gets found out. She outs herself as a Force user, pushing somebody against the wall. And it's interesting, you know, they jump right to Jedi, because we're in a time period where people only attribute Force powers to Jedi, and anybody who would have Force powers would be a Jedi, because who else wouldn't be? Because all Jedi, like, if you show Force sensitivity, you're taught from birth. But they say this line of, like, the Council will regret sending you. So now Ahsoka's in this awkward situation where she's literally about to cause a galactic incident because she's somewhere she shouldn't be, not acting on behalf of the Jedi at all. And this is kind of getting explained by the Pikes. Martez sisters show up, and this is the part I've been waiting for a while, where Ahsoka is revealed to be a Jedi. Now, they don't have a whole lot of time for a conversation here because they're in trouble. Now that they actually have the spice, it doesn't do them any good because, of course, now the Pikes think they're caught up in some sort of Republic sting operation. They basically get away because Ahsoka has laid the mines, and she uses the mines as a distraction. But the Martez sisters are upset. They wish that Ahsoka had told them, and of course Ahsoka feels like she couldn't have told them because she knew their family backstory. Now, when the charges blow, we again cut to the Mandalorians, and we see them watching. There's been a couple of theories that have come out with these Mandalorians. One is the idea of, could Ursa Wren be the armorer from the Mandalorian? And I think this is based off of their voices sounding kind of similar and their personalities being kind of similar. I don't think it's a bad theory, especially if the armorer wants to protect herself, so she's not really saying she's from Clan Wren or something. I think it's more likely if they're putting the armorer in the show, which they technically, I mean, they could. It's not too far off. If we're talking about a young character who would be about the right age when we get to The Mandalorian. I think it's more likely if they were going to put the armorer in the show, she's probably the third Mandalorian who hasn't spoken yet, just because we don't know a lot there, and then you don't have to tweak anybody's backstory. But I don't know, that maybe it is Ursa Wren, maybe armorer, somebody we haven't seen yet and won't see. Hard to really say, but I mean, Filoni was working on both projects, so it'd be pretty easy for him to have snuck something in there. If I had to put money down on the armorer being somewhere in the show, it would be on the third on Mandalorian who hasn't spoken. But Ahsoka and the sisters are trying to get away. They get to the ship, and then there's this really cool fight, basically, as they're escaping. There's some good talk between Ahsoka and Trace. Ahsoka is trying to escape, also kind of trying to apologize. Trace is like, well, if you're a Jedi, you're a good shot, so start shooting. And it was really cool to see the three of them working together. You know, if we're talking about Smuggler's Run at Galaxy's Edge, Rafa is being the engineer and, like, lining up all the shots, and Trace is being the pilot, and Ahsoka's the gunner, and they all have to work together and say, oh, I'm turning right, so, you know, Ahsoka knows how to aim, and it was really cool. And then they lose the rear deflectors, they lose the gun, and so Trace pulls this move where she basically plays chicken with a guy from the Pike Syndicate. She comes around because they have forward shields still, and pulls this daring move, and I liked that for a couple episodes we'd seen Trace trying something daring and it not work out, and Rafa and Ahsoka were always worried about it, and then something Trace did work out, and so I thought that was a cool thing at the end. They get away, they head back to Coruscant. At first it looks like the Martez sisters want nothing to do with Ahsoka, but then they do have a good conversation. Rafa plays around about how, like, why aren't you arresting me for spice running? You know, Ahsoka explains, like, I used to be a Jedi, but it's complicated. And Rafa, I thought this was funny. Rafa was like, I don't want your complicated story, but you act like a Jedi, or at least how I would want a Jedi to act. And I liked that moment because it was so perfectly timed out, because at first you think Rafa is insulting Ahsoka for saying you act like a Jedi, and that was something I had been commenting on, that she was acting like these arrogant Jedi and judgmental Jedi that she chose to leave. But then Rafa's like, how I'd want Jedi to be, and just to watch Ahsoka's face during that exchange, and to see the peace made between Rafa and Ahsoka, but also just the idea of Ahsoka is what the Jedi should be. Yeah, she might not be perfect, but, you know, who is? But she ultimately is out for the good of people and wants to help people. It's at this point the Mandalorians show up, and I appreciated this moment also because the last time Ahsoka saw Bo-Katan, she was working with Death Watch and, like, trying to kidnap her and Lux. Ahsoka was not a part of the arc we have all seen, where we know Bo-Katan is sister to Satine Cruz, which suddenly makes her a lot more likable. I mean, I never disliked her, but I mean, makes her more sympathetic, maybe is the best word. And so I liked that. I like how they have this shared enemy now in Maul. And the Martez sisters actually encourage Ahsoka to go with the Mandalorians, to go help, even if it means she might have to face the Jedi again, which is something that makes Ahsoka nervous. It ends with Ahsoka leaving them her bike to say, like, I'll hopefully come back someday. And I thought that was a nice moment, that they had this tense moment where the truth was revealed, but they could stay friends at the end of the episode. And that was just a really cool shot of Ahsoka leaving with the Mandalorians to go to Mandalore, and we're going to get the Siege of Mandalore. We're finally getting the Siege of Mandalore. And so I liked it. I liked this episode. I thought it was solid. I thought it wrapped up the arc really well. I had been enjoying the episodes in this arc individually, but I feel how successful this arc was going to be based off of how well the ending landed. I thought the ending landed really well. I thought it made everything we had seen feel more relevant for maybe folks who were struggling with the relevancy of the story. And I don't know, I enjoyed it. I'm excited to see where it goes, and I think that the Siege of Mandalore will be better for us having these episodes. I am curious how much these episodes were originally going to tie into Siege of Mandalore and how much that got changed. However that plays out, I'm really happy with what we got. But I want to know what you guys thought about the episode. Please leave me a comment letting me know what you think. If you're not already, follow us on all of the socials. And until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun.